Welcome to Evenings with an Author at the American Library in Paris. I'm Rachel Donadio. I'm the curator of cultural programs here, and it is a great honor and pleasure to be here this evening with our scholar in residence, scholar of note in residence, Kendra Greene. Kendra is a writer and book artist based in Dallas. She is the author and illustrator of The Museum of Whales You Will Never See, first published by Penguin and Granta, and now translated into German and French. With publications from Atlas Obscura to Zyzzyva, her work has been presented at the Smithsonian, exhibited at the Reading Room, collected as far away as Qatar, and supported by fellowships from Fulbright, MacDowell, and the Library Innovation Lab at Harvard. Tin House will unleash a collection of her essays and curiosity called No Less Strange and Wonderful in the winter of 2025. And in her time here as scholar of note, Kendra has been working on a nonfiction book-length project on hell, or l'enfer. So there are a couple things you need to know about Kendra. One is that she has a beautiful, brilliant, and wide-ranging mind. She has tremendous intellectual curiosity, a great sense of humor, and she's incapable of writing a boring page. She will take you on wild adventures through bestiaries in her forthcoming book, and through very strange small museums of Iceland in this book, The Museum of Whales You Will Never See. But really one of the things animating your work and a lot of your thinking is who collects what and why, and how collectors collect, what motivates them. And I wanted, before we discuss the elephant in the room, which is the giraffe, I was really practicing that one. I wanted to ask you just a little bit about collecting and collectors, and tell us about what draws you to these questions, and what are these, this is your great theme, and tell us a little bit about why that is.
And we'll things are working. First of all, thank you all for coming here. I see so many people that I already adore, and people that I'm sure I will be adoring soon. I sort of backed into collections. I was working at a museum, and I ended up managing the collection, and it gave me a front row seat to the fact that the best stuff was in the vault. And I knew from one end, but now I knew from the back end, that this question that has been driving me the rest of my adult life: how do you ask for a thing you don't know exists? Because, mark my words, right, there are things, there are facts, there are ideas, there are stories that will change what you know to be possible, which will change your actual life. And we should find as many of them as we humanly can. So I knew about that because of the vault, and could help people find them in one kind of way. And I got interested in the people that hold on to them. Like this was seriously troubling to me when I was 25, and even more earnest than I am now. Surely we have not trusted the material and intellectual history of the world to a handful of eccentric volunteers. That's not a plan. There's got to be a better way to do things. But the thing is that it works. Because it's not just collectors. Collectors bring things in. Family of collectors I've talked to in Iceland would want you to be sure to know they aren't like the rest of us. Right? There's something in the blood. They are seeking. They are organizing in a way that not everyone does. And that's part of the ecosystem of collection. But everyone else is still part of it. All of us that take an interest, that go, that hear that there's something we really should see and follow up on that, have this sort of like selective pressure that brings institutions into being, right, makes collections into things that more and more people can find.
And, okay, I wonder, in your own experience in Paris, looking at you've looked at some archives and museums in Both. They're different things in Paris. Will you tell us about some of your great adventures in archives in Paris or beyond? I know you've looked in many.
Yeah. Well, let's start in Paris, shall we? There's a short passage I wanted to read to you. The Special Collections Library at the University of North Carolina fortunately received 600 volumes from Florence Farrington, a woman we all love because of the things that she loved. She amassed 600 volumes of rare books on natural history, taxidermy, cabinets of curiosity, and children's books with animals in them. And it's not fully cataloged yet, so about the best you can do is look for the date and the title and see if you want to know more. And they're rare books, right? The Victorians in particular, they have subtitles you could fall in love with. This is from a very thin blue pamphlet published in England on taxidermy procedures in the 1800s. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this passage, and I would like you to have the same experience I do. We're on page 193 on a section called Artificial Eyes. German-made eyes are far before the English in point of artistic excellence and variety of color. But, although some prefer the rather flatter, thinner German eyes, there is no doubt that the French are the best. And it goes on for some time.
These are taxidermy eyes. These are eyes that you put in.
Yes.
We'll just back up here. Yeah.
Right. And taxidermy is a fairly recent development in human history, right? Having a sense of enough science and enough artistry, and the commerce of getting the materials, because some eyes are glass and you're painting them from behind, but there's only so small you can make those, so most bird eyes are going to have to be done in a different manner. The illumination that happens with a flat eye or a round eye. There's a lot going on just for the eyes before we talk about how the legs are almost always, by amateurs, set too far back on a bird. They need to come forward. And what should you stuff them with? And eventually we get into the 1900s and are talking about borax. Have you heard of it? It's going to change everything. But not before we started stuffing things with arsenic or dipping them in mercury or figuring out some way to arrest life so that we could hold on to its image. Back to Paris. You may know about a museum called something like the Louvre. It's important to me that you know it is founded within a year of the National Natural History Museum here. That it is born of the same impulse that makes us think that exquisite, remarkable, extravagant things in the hands of just a few is corrupting. But if we can all see them, it's educational. And we should know what exists in this world and how people who have the chance to think about it are making sense of it. In my very first trip to Paris, sort of by accident, just following things that had interested me, I ended up in short succession visiting what I now think of as the natural history triangle of Paris. May you get lost in it too. Of course, the National Natural History Museum. I don't know if you've been there. It feels like a 6th-floor arc with this parade of animals coming down the center. The pageantry is amazing. The dodo is not on display, but that also seems appropriate. And then you have, I was at this really wonderful literary festival in Appalachia. And a writer there, who's a hunter, was pointing out that when I got to Paris, there was really only one museum I needed to see. They didn't have a turkey, but he thought maybe he could fix that someday. And when I arrived in Paris for the first time last year, because this beautiful book had been beautifully translated, the Parisians asked me, "What are you going to do while you're here?" And I said with some uncertainty, "I hear there's only one museum I need to see in Paris." Le Musée de la Chasse, the Museum of the Hunt and Nature.
Yes.
And every Parisian then nodded at me like I knew a secret password and said, oh, you know. And it is, to me, the most cabinet of curiosities place I have ever seen, and I have been searching them out and falling into them for some time now. It has the sort of royal court painting of the hunt, but also the trophies, also the carved powder kegs, right, the accoutrement. Here, a room devoted to horses. Here, a room devoted to dogs. Ah, the falcons with their little feathered, amazing, adorable hats. And this historic collection then shot through with contemporary art using animals. Amazing.
Amazing.
And then the third point, this multi-generational family business devoted to flora and fauna illustration and taxidermy. You can go, and as you're wandering the floors, you will see somebody pinning out butterflies, right? You can buy any number of specimens to take home with you. And each place had elicited a different set of questions for me, but put them together, how many bodies were in front of me? How were they trafficked? How did they get there? Why did we need to hold on to them? What does it mean to encounter something through art or commerce or science? And is there any other way that you would have access to these things? So, one, I think you should plan your field trips, make sure that you see all of them, and marvel at what a long history Paris has on each axis, much less the intermingling and the places where you can't tell them apart.
You must have. There's also a polar bear at the Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature. That must have. Yeah.
The thing I know about polar bears is that they show up in museums where they have no right to be. They're like party crashers of the taxidermy world.
No one wants to get in an argument with the polar bear, even the stuffed one. But this nexus of art, commerce, scholarship, of how we explore the natural world and when we hold on to it and when we stuff it and when we put it on display and the politics of that as well, I think brings us to
our effigy.
Our effigy. Kendra, I need to ask you about Zarafa the Giraffe. I need to ask you about
to tell you about Zarafa the
interest
Giraffe.
in Zarafa the Giraffe and how this giraffe got to Paris and tell us more about that. I'm going to leave it as an open-ended question. Zarafa, any thoughts?
Well, before we can talk about Zarafa, we need to talk about giraffes in Europe. Maybe no one has discussed giraffes in Europe with you before. They don't live here. But they have reason to come. There's in fact a Roman tradition of the wooden giraffe, sort of imagine a Trojan horse, but a giraffe. And think back come with me to 1486, when Lorenzo de' Medici receives a giraffe from Egypt. Can you imagine being so fabulously wealthy no one knows what to get you? Right, this is how you send a hippopotamus to the Pope and then it falls into the harbor in Lisbon and you have to get it out in taxidermy because the Pope doesn't have any kind of hippopotamus. This is still a good gift. The Medici giraffe is allowed to walk around Florence. There are noblewomen who feed her from second-story windows, right? Just stretch out their hands and give her an apple. People write poetry about it because that is what poetry is for. So in 1826, when Muhammad Ali Pasha decides to send a diplomatic gift to Paris, it has been a long time since Europe has seen a giraffe. Europe has heard about giraffes, right? The early reports of what is almost certainly a giraffe, but who's really to be sure, right? The camelopard, show up in the medieval bestiaries. We've heard about a thing, but who has seen it? So she's put on a boat with her 3 cows to give her milk because she is still a baby. They get her as far as Marseille, and they think, we are not sailing this giraffe all the way to Paris. We can't do that. So what they do instead is sort of overwinter in Marseille, get their bearings, start taking her out for walks, and it occurs to them, giraffes can walk. If you notice, it's actually a really interesting gait. Both legs on each side at the same time. Almost nothing walks like that. But she's getting stronger, and they decide it's only 500 miles to Paris. We could do that in like 45 days. And they make her a two-piece raincoat because they aren't sure what she was used to in Egypt, and it might not be rain. And they think about the optics of it, and they aren't sure that having a non-European leading her in is an acceptable look for France. So they write to the National Natural History Museum, and they say, who knows the most, what French scientist knows the most about giraffes? Functionally, there is no one. But, you know, there's sort of a fancy guy who maybe knew something about them once, and he's got gout and is retired, but he's free. And so he goes down and can be the face of French science, bringing this giraffe all the way to Paris. And you can imagine, if you heard about this, you would pack a picnic and go watch. I didn't grow up on the East Coast in the US, but I'm told that there are places, a sort of George Washington slept here kind of series of markers. And please, somebody start sending me pictures to confirm that this is true, that there are still places between here and Marseille that are the giraffe walked by in, that sort of thing.
It was essentially also a diplomatic act.
Huge.
This giraffe. It was the Ottoman viceroy sends it because he wants to he wants to stop getting flack for his efforts to crush the Greek uprising against Ottoman rule. So it's kind of, oh, we'll send this giraffe. I mean, is it soft power? Is it hard power? Is it animal power? But it
depends on which part of the giraffe. Well, and so successful that the next year sends two more giraffes, one to Vienna and one to London. Right, the stories of the French king pouting because he's going to be the last person in Paris to see the giraffe. Right, these huge crowds have been coming out all across the country for weeks. And by the time she actually arrives, this is a giraffe that in her lifetime and for more than 100 years after does not have a name because she is so singular. Right, she can be La Belle Africaine. She can be Her Highness. We have things to call her, but she does not need a name because there's only one. Since the 80s, there's a book that gives her the name Zarafa, meaning something like beautiful one, which is how we know what to call her. It's been adopted since. But in this moment, think of manias. Listomania, Beatlemania, Giraffe mania. It's hard to overstate what a sensation this is, what something like this walking through town does to people. There are hairstyles. There's a way of tying your tie. There is a puffy sleeve that then comes out or comes tightly in like a knobby knee. There is a perfume. There are two styles of pastry in Vienna and a nascent form of latte art that looks like spots. There are multiple colors. Belly of giraffe versus giraffe in love. Which will the parlor look better in? Right? People make plays and dances and write about this thing. We just cannot get over it. The influenza that year is named after the giraffe. We still have it in the language. Do we have French speakers in the audience? Have any of you ever mentioned that someone was combing the giraffe?
We don't use it that much.
It lies dormant, but you know it? It's like it's too much for anyone to understand.
What does it mean? I actually don't know that expression.
I will take it from the French speakers to correct me. I understand it to mean something like twiddling your thumbs or wasting time or doing something that's not really necessary. based on the 18 years that Zarafa spends with her groom. He walks with her to Paris and is with her the rest of her life, and every day makes a show of combing the giraffe.
Glad it's acceptable in polite company to use that one. And so where does Zarafa fit into your essays and curiosity? Is she connected to a particular line of inquiry or I mean, it's such a fascinating, wonderful story in and of itself. But.
Absolutely. There are books on it. There are lots of children's books. If you know a child, make sure that they find their way to one. It's too incredible of a story. In my life, I once had a 6-year-old friend. And I was walking home with my 6-year-old friend, and I do not know why it was important for me to explain that in my youth, and the youths of, I think, a generation of us in a Tri-County area, there was the Santa Barbara Zoo giraffe. I like to imagine somewhere out on the Zoom, someone's nodding around, yes, there was the Santa Barbara Zoo giraffe. And I will explain to you now, as I explained it to my 6-year-old friend. If your standard, if your typical, if your iconic giraffe does this, the Santa Barbara Zoo giraffe did this. She had these two very noticeable bends in her neck. You could not miss it. And I discovered in that moment that once you have made a giraffe, yeah, and I see some in the audience. I want to see a bunch in the audience. If you can, you just bring the snoot down to the jaw. Mm-hmm. Yeah, leave your ossicones pointy.
Can I just take a picture?
This is the cutest thing that ever happened. I notice you can be tall giraffes. That's right. You can get Jamina. It turns out she had a name, although I only know it because I wrote a book and thought I should find out. She was just the Santa Barbara Zoo giraffe. And you might feel it right now in your giraffe. Once you realize there's a giraffe at the end of your hand, it has to greet someone. Hey!
Hi!
And I'm not sure that people who have known me, that my 6-year-old friend is now a senior at Bard. So Giraffe's been with us for a while now. And all of the children that have been born in my family, to my friends since then, right, have squeezed with their little infant death grips onto ossicones, have shown us that the first stage of the giraffe is a snake. Then you sort of maybe get the unicorn. Then the ossicones wander around. You get sort of a bunny. Things are a little confusing for adolescent giraffes until one day, everything pops into place. And so I was thinking about giraffe, and specifically a thing that has happened at conferences and dinner parties, and what my copy editor notes as adult social situations. That occasionally, giraffe has something in its teeth. Rachel?
Yes, Kendra?
Rachel, do I have something in my teeth?
Yes, you have a pencil in your teeth.
Oh! So embarrassing. I'm basically on TV. Mm-hmm. Did I get it?
Absolutely.
Normally, I'm much more adept at this. I've never actually dropped a Blackwing pencil before. But the thing I discovered is, given a second chance, people start lying to giraffe. And that's weird.
Oh, I told you like it was.
The first time. Well, we may never know, Rachel. Had I not sent a pencil into the air, had giraffe not sent a pencil into the air, would we know?
Oh no, nothing. Everything's fine. That's what happens after that.
Thanks. What a relief. What a good friend you are. And so I was thinking about what I learned because of giraffe, how people interact with giraffe, and the more I started writing down the things I knew about giraffe, the more I realized it was telling me about everything else. It was telling me about play and wonder and trust and what we believe and what we know. So by the time you get to the end of this bestiary, giraffe gets the last word because it has the most to say about fibbing, about what matters and where we find meaning.
Through giraffe. It's great.
Yeah, and meanwhile, your balloon twister friend says, hey, I'm doing this series and I need some giraffe facts. What would you recommend that 3 to 5-year-olds know? And you start looking at giraffe facts, right? You have nieces to educate. You get to know a lot about giraffes. And the things that you know make sense given the things you know about giraffe. That there is a way that we have to, want to, encounter wonder, that we approach the unknown. And that's a thing we should pay attention to.
No, I think the sense of play and wonder is a really beautiful force pulling through all your work. I'd like to divert slightly away from giraffes and towards herring, if I may, and towards some of the museums in your book of the collectors of Iceland. This is an amazing book. It is an anthropological, social, cultural history of Iceland, but told through Kendra's sense of great curiosity as she encounters these collectors of things, from rocks or, as we discussed, the most famous museum in Iceland is the Phallological Museum, which has more than 300 samples of mammal penises. This book isn't actually just about weirdos. It's about...
I would argue it's not at all about weirdos.
Pray tell me, what is this book about? And then I will offer you some of my thoughts about what I found extremely powerful in it. But
well, I'm just tempted to go on the digression about weird, strange, kooky, eccentric, but also whimsical, also quirky. Words that have tremendous value and importance to me, and which I don't know how to explain the value and importance of without the words that contradict them. Do you know what I mean? Without having to bring weight and seriousness to them as a way of saying that they matter, which linguistically is a real problem, that they deserve to be exactly what they are and still matter, still be meaningful, still be beautiful, still be necessary. They keep coming up in the work because if you're paying attention, you have to see everything. And so, of course, things are going to be funny and unusual and unlikely. And so the language of it is important to me. Also, I think we should be proud of and reclaim words like weirdo.
well, the book and these collectors, Iceland, plagues and terrible weather. They only had dry feet for the first time in 1,000 years when rubber boots arrived. I mean, there are all kinds of.
Unless you thought that was too weird and had to add a little water back in.
There's the famine, there is smallpox. It's incredible that anyone ever survived on Iceland. And what you talk about so beautifully in this book is that the people who collect things, whether that's people who want to preserve a building that used to be a plant for herring before the herring went away, or whether it's someone collecting these rocks and holding on to this is really about what we hold on to. And that's a great assertion of value. What do we value? What do we care about? What do we want to remember? And I think that this is actually a very timely thing to think about right now, where, around the world, a lot of the questions are, what are we holding on to? What do we collectively value? What's ours? What's yours? What's mine? And I think that this is something that this book left me thinking about, that how do we hold on to what's lost, and how collectively these collections help assign meaning to who we are.
Yeah, in my museum days, another thing that really troubled me was the question of what even lasts long enough that we can hold on to it, right? How limited are we from the jump in having any idea of what has come before? I mean, right, truly, this is terrifying, right? This is existential dread. We are reduced to the things that last? Are you kidding me? And the longer I sit with this question, the more fascinated I am by the fact that things persist. That's worth paying attention to also.
What do you mean? Give us an example.
So the Dallas Museum of Art has this tapestry from Central America that is about, say, 3 feet by 6 feet. And half the panel is yellow feathers, something small, sort of a parakeety size, and half of the panel is blue. And that centuries and centuries after the fact, it is vibrant, it is whole, it is available. Any one of those things doesn't seem like it should be true, right? If you think about the actual making of a feather, they're exquisite, right? And they're ephemeral. They're meant to be let go, to be sloughed off, right? They're fingernail clippings come to that, right? So when I stopped worrying about what we lose and started being in awe of what we keep, of what we can have, of all the things that we have because of the benign effects of neglect, right? That we only get because they were off to the side and we weren't looking at them for a while, and then they had the opportunity to come back. I mean, I fundamentally believe that binaries are usually a bad way of thinking about things, but they're so useful as models. And if we reduced ourselves to the two things human beings love, I'm pretty sure it comes down to stuff. Especially those of you at home, look around, think about all the stuff you were surrounded by, right? We live in an era where we have so much stuff, we buy apartments for our garbage called storage units. And of course, right, the material, tactile, physical world is full of information. It is full of things that keep us safe and sound and alive, not the least of which because they delight and tell us things. So stuff, real big deal. But the stories, push comes to shove, they win. And you can tell this if you pay attention to what we do with the things, the ways that we employ them to carry the stories. Right? We will keep, we will make, we will invent, we will repurpose things so that they can be touchstones and hold on to the stuff that matters to us most.
And is this something that's always drawn you as a concept? I mean, we've talked about how what people hold on to are stuff and stories, and the object is a way of holding on to information or conveying information. Is this? I'm just curious in the development of your thought and of your oeuvre. And you also pull together just a tremendous amount of disparate information and this and that, but we weave it together. It's like you take the feathers from this and that, and then the stones in it, and it's a beautiful, beautiful collage.
I mean, the first thing I ever knew that I loved was conversation. And the first thing I ever knew that I wanted was a library ladder. So I think you end up here sort of in a hurry. I think conversation means interaction and sharing. It is, if you think about like a language philosopher like Paul Griest would tell us about the cooperative principle, that you can feel it in your bones. You get irritated if someone tries to tell you too much information or too little information, right? We don't like people that ramble on, and we don't like people that withhold. And conversation, at its best, at its most beautiful, is partly discovery and partly sharing of the absolute best things you could know. So I think I came to it from the stories and fell into the ways that we hold them.
You have said that you're writing what you call a secret trilogy, and
It's very secret.
and this is book one. The No Less Strange or Wonderful is book two, and tell us a little about the secret third book.
And poor secret third book, I started working on it before book one sold, and then I had all of my appointments lined up. My research trips were all set for March of 2020. Ha ha, indeed. And so for a while it seemed really potentially like an interesting intellectual exercise to write a book about restricted access when it was totally impossible to go anywhere and see anything. Meanwhile, this came into being, this sort of bestiary of fleeting visions. But now, I'm back here for the express purpose of catching up with book 3, The Poison Cabinet. So if book 1 is about how we love things and stories, but stories win, book 2 is about how we make sense of all the things we can't see through the things we can. So grief and love and difference and death via chipmunks with human fingers and exploding sharks. And book 3, The Poison Cabinet, is how we hold on to the things that we fear. What on earth do we do with that? The Germans give us the word Giftschrank, literally the poison cabinet. They exist in pharmacies, in labs, and for the last 400 years in libraries, where the first one was an actual locked box of 400 volumes of science and literature. In the most recent incarnations, they would be full of Nazi propaganda. And when I was here last year for the French edition of the Icelandic book, I was telling this to my publishers, and I said, isn't it great? What a word the Germans have given us to think about this place of most restricted access. And they said, you know what we have in France? Hell. L'enfer, right? Hell is a part of the library. Strangely, it's upstairs. The first one was in an attic. The visual l'enfer is up on the 4th floor. But since 1730, some monks have let us know that is the place where we put the things that we are most afraid of. And it's a phenomenon that happens in a bunch of different ways, in a bunch of different places. When I was an intern at the Chicago Historical Society, part of the facility tour was going to the very roof where there was a tiny shack full of nitrate negatives. This is the laugh of someone who knows they are spontaneously combustible. Right, have taken down movie theaters for sure, but whole collections. There's a thick, choking, poisonous smoke. Water only makes it worse. It's really bad news. And the joke was, we only ever send interns up for them. No. Kidding, not kidding. Which stayed with me when I was a collections manager a few years later and watched this collections manager listserv thread start sort of, soberly, innocently, with someone saying, we found explosives in the collection. What are best practices? And then this volley of, well, are they munitions or ammunition? The person who knows the most about hand grenades is over here.
Was this in Texas?
Chicago, my friend. I mean, it was a national association. But in my memory, it ends with a question that someone posed about, does anyone remember which Museum of Natural History in Canada had their whale ovary collection? The chemistry went bad and they had to explode all of them in the parking lot with the bomb squad? just chasing down literally what could kill you is a long list in collecting institutions. I mean, it really is kind of everything, right? The leather will disintegrate and create red rot. There's all sorts of molds and dusts you really shouldn't inhale. Boy, will we put heavy metals anywhere we can. There are things that can fall on you, right? There are things that can poke you. Like there's stabbing possibilities. Lots of things could happen before anything spontaneously catches fire. And that's just the material danger. What we do with, and I've started to think of it not even as immaterial, but as ideological danger, which is a form still, I think, of physical danger. It's just delayed. The things that worry us about ideologies are the ways that they will create harm, that they will physically cause us to suffer in one way or another, if not end our lives. So ideas that can do that, what do we do about them? How do we hold on to them? And I find these spaces, the Giftschrank, l'Enfer, the forgery closet at the Harvard Art Museum, the conscience pile in front of the Petrified Forest National Park, all sorts of places in all sorts of ways, trying to figure out what we do with this stuff. Because of all the things that we fear, because they get marked as dangerous, but the point is less, I think, that they're dangerous. I think the more salient point is that they are the things that we are afraid of. Sometimes with really good reason. Sometimes because we have some work to do as a culture to catch up. But more than we fear any of the things that we have, any of the ideas that they represent, I think these are locations that tell us that we fear even more forgetting. We fear censoring. We fear losing. And if you watch them over time, it can take 2 centuries, but stuff gets out. You aren't confined there forever. You will eventually get out of hell. Even as it is, I mean, it's smaller than you'd think it is. It's only half full. We maybe need the concept of it to exist more than the actual thing. But eventually, we figure out what to do with it. We can decontaminate, we can contextualize, we can make things safe enough to handle so that we have the evidence, we have the history, we have the fact of how it's been.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank the ongoing tradition of memory workers and collections folks who have faith in the people who come after us and the people they serve right now.
Amen. I think at this point we can open up to some questions from our friends in the audience. If any of you have a question.
Yeah, I was going to say, spoiler alert, we're calling on giraffes first.
And Mayanne will come around with a mic.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, do you collect anything? And if you could collect something, if money and time were no object, what would you collect?
The best question I've ever heard.
Go, Emma.
Emma, you're pitting different parts of myself against each other. I mean, there's a real value into having as little as you can, right? To traveling light, to being agile and nimble. And yet, I mean, I collect stories, I think is clearly the easy answer. Right? Anecdotes, fragments, right? Bits of meaning that can be grouped together and in relationship tell you something more. There's definitely stuff I own more of than I need to. I have a very rich stationery drawer. But there's not a thing I consistently seek out in order to complete something. If I could collect things, I mean, back when I wanted a library ladder, I mean, not that anyone ever stops wanting a library ladder, but the library I imagined it in would be every book I have ever read in the order that I read them.
Oh, wow.
If I could collect anything, that would be it.
So it's retrospective. It's the books that you already read, not the ones you're still going to read.
Yeah, it's not my nightstand.
Okay. Yeah, and we talked about the collector's impulse. There's something. What sets apart collectors from the rest of us, or others? Maybe some of us are collectors.
Not to other collectors in the audience. I mean, because it seems like a human impulse to keep close what matters, what we hold dear. That there are things we only know in aggregate and in accumulation. So I think there's a real wisdom in it. But I'm telling you, the people that are related to them want you to know, no. It's its own thing. It's a species of its own. And there's a museum in Los Angeles that is ostensibly an automobile collection. But there are also organs, and I mean it in the musical sense, upstairs, and hood ornaments. And it was the first place I had the inkling of the fact that collectors just collect. But then it's up to the rest of us, as I was saying earlier, to come together to think about what matters.
This is just a quick backup for a French speaker to correct. I do believe a library ladder in old French libraries is called a giraffe.
Oh, Abigail!
Stop the presses!
Full circle.
We'll check. I love being surrounded by people that tell me amazing things and then also say, I need to corroborate it. I'll send you documentation.
That's wonderful. Hang on, we have a question in the front row here.
Maybe two.
Thank you. Could you tell us more about your book? Is it entirely about Iceland?
This book is entirely about Iceland, but let me tell you what it fails to do. A country of now about 360,000 people has, and this is a surprisingly hard thing to pin down for a bunch of reasons we can discuss later, has about 300 museums and public collections. So just take that roughly 1 to 1,000 ratio and think about anywhere you know the population for. If anybody does know the population of somewhere and wants to give us an example, I would totally take it. It's a wild amount of museums, and seen most clearly in a place like Fletchery in the Vestfjords, where 201 people have 5 museums. 6 if you count the one at the edge of town. 7 if you count the first museum that is currently buried under an avalanche. That there is that sort of density, that sort of proclivity, is astonishing. It is worth writing a book about. I would argue it's worth reading a book about. And I only give you 15 of them very directly.
So what do we do about the Collier brothers?
Would you like to fill us in?
No.
This is very
Going
mysterious.
to the expert.
Kendra, who are the Collier brothers?
This is a really good question.
These are two presumably guys who filled the house with old newspapers so you couldn't get in.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody agree with me who knows about the Collier brothers? Okay.
That's hoarding, not collecting.
Yeah, where does one...
What is the distinction between hoarding and collecting? This reminds me of a museum I love in Iceland that is sometimes translated as the Museum of Sundry Objects, which wants to point out to you that if it's not old now, it will be. I was visiting it with an architectural historian friend who felt very strongly, and I think is accurate on this, that collections have order. There is sense. Things are there for a reason. And that one thing is what the difference is. Now, we are indebted, right? There are hoards and caches and stores that are the reason, a long time later, that we often know anything about anything. What do we do about it? I have so many questions about the authority, the social pressure, what we could... Yeah, well, and I think there's a question of how do we act now, thinking about the future, what that responsibility does, how it shapes and changes how we live now, that are big questions worth thinking about that I'm going to leave open.
Do we have any other audience questions?
Thank you. What's your view of the nature of captions in museums of collections? Do you think they should be very minimal? I mean, how much of the... You know, sometimes you go to a museum and you feel the caption is too in its current period and is sort of telling you what to think about it. And then other museums are just incredibly bare, or indeed I've been to museums, no captions at all. So I'm just interested in what the current thinking is on that sort of thing.
The current thinking or my current thinking?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I think so much about this. I think about how rarely you ever see an author attached to museum text. Entirely on purpose. We could make other decisions, but the way that it gives you the sense of an institutional authority, that there is one way to look at this, there's one thing you need to know, boy, like that's really built in. And I think it's not the way we should ever approach text. I used to write museum text, and I would lead print viewings, and photography professors would hang out with me afterwards, and every once in a while they would talk about how, with such pride, about the fact that they never read the text. They knew what I did for a living. And then I started to notice there was a spectrum, right? There would be the people that made sure they looked at everything and then read the text. I have now been waiting for the missing link in this spectrum. I am hoping to find, maybe you can help me, is there a person that goes and only reads the museum text? Because it's fascinating, it is so often trying to do a thing that is impossible, right? It is this act of translation is trying to put in another form something that has completely realized what it is. And trying to do that is wild, that you often find in art museums in particular, this like the language that contradicts itself, right? It'll talk about the big smallness, and you will think, yes, I see it. Because it's right. Right, to talk about a thing that doesn't happen in language, you have to make language do things it can't do. So there's an idea in writing museum text that you have a visitor's attention for no more than 30 seconds. 75 words. Christine Colson has written a novel only in museum text. Go find One Woman Show. We'll talk about it later. Should is a moral judgment, so I don't have a thought on what museum text should do, besides be accurate and respect your curiosity. Point as much as it can to things you should know and the fact that there's more than it has time to say.
We had a question on Zoom. If I remember correctly, it was, will you have an animal on the cover of your third book?
Great question.
It depends on even already which edition. The Germans do not give us an animal on the Museum of Wales. You get some nets and you'll like them. For me, the question is whether there will be illuminations within the book. There are 40-some drawings in the Icelandic book. there are, and this gets really difficult to even enumerate. I did a census downstairs a couple of weeks ago, and there are judgment calls, but 53 images from rare books in conversation with about the same number of my photographs, drawings from photographs, film negatives from my sister-in-law, mammography film, botanical monoprints, and 40 wasps to swarm the margins of Ted Cruz's A Sentient Bag of Wasps. So I think what text and image get to do together, and the friction, the illumination, these two ways of knowing, like I think a lot about how literature is profoundly lucky. I mean, written language, we're still on the ground floor of 5,000 years of figuring out what this can do. And we inherit the wealth of the oral tradition and the wealth of marks on a page. So the possibilities for what they get to do when they hang out together, it's endless, it's astonishing, it's miraculous. And what that would mean for a book about restricted access, I can't wait to find out.
Redactions.
I mean, erasure is a really fascinating thing.
It's an act of power.
Reclaiming also,
Oh, reclaiming, yeah.
which is one of the great powers.
It could be, well, yeah, you'll have to think about that. Are you going to illustrate that book?
Golly, I hope so.
Because you are also an artist as well. Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Kendra? There are questions. Hang on.
Can you tell us how to get No Less Strange or Wonderful? Since the Icelandic book is already out, so that's available.
Right. I'm sure you either have or have reason to make a great friendship with an independent bookseller. Yes, Penguin and Granta and Libeskind and Marchalet will give you access to the Museum of Wales you will never see. And Tin House has pre-orders available now on the interwebs, and your independent booksellers, go tell them there's a thing that you want to know more about.
Mm-hmm. When will it be published?
March 4th.
Okay.
Who made the giraffe?
Oh, who made the giraffe? Great question.
I mean, this does seem like one of the great questions of our time. Who did make the giraffe? My friend Lucy sent me a passage today about the anti-giraffe as a hieroglyph. We have so many giraffe questions. This is a neighborhood giraffe. She was spotted by the library staff in the neighborhood, outside, and escorted back where she belongs.
Right here.
Yeah, the GoFundMe to buy her a seat to go home, it will be started after this, I'm assuming.